Welcome, everyone. Before our casual and fancy CyCon dinner to the session of strategic vulnerabilities, time for a new approach. I'm Lieutenant Ihsan Tolga from CCDCOE, and it's such an honor and privilege to be facilitating this panel in CyCon, surrounded with brilliant people, colleagues, who are also expert in their areas. And as the saying goes, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. In this sense, more lately, we have been hearing more and more about cyber and information system vulnerabilities. And then this appears to be a case with two sides. On one side, it's not difficult to see that this can be a low-hanging fruit in regard to enhancing cyber effects, which I believe also a topic being discussed more openly more lately. And on the other side, the situation leads us to multiple areas of concerns. Among these areas, there are two areas, in my humble opinion, which have been overlooked so far. One is that the cyber information sharing for vulnerabilities in industrial control systems and critical infrastructure is somewhat lagging behind the others. And the other area is that the recent projection of everlasting battle between cost and quality, and some call it a triangle with cost, quality, and speed, which one cannot have all at the same time. And using the commercial off-the-shelf software oftentimes works wonders, even on military systems and industrial critical infrastructure, and widely opted for, but this also brings significant liabilities for the corresponding system's cybersecurity. And still staying on the defensive side and moving forward from being reactive towards proactive against cyber incidents concerning indications and warnings, the idea is put forward that NATO nations can benefit a lot from adopting a high-level, educated approach, which is also featured here soon. Luckily, we have 4 great papers and speakers here today addressing these challenging topics. I guess it makes the most sense to start with a higher-level approach, followed by cyber effects, and sequentially with more in-depth analysis about codes, vulnerabilities, and information sharing. And I'd like to note that each presentation today will be followed by a brief Q&A for particular Q&A. And at the very end, we will have a longer overall Q&A session. So if you have overarching questions regarding multiple topics, please keep them ready for the very end. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the stage to Ms. Biljana Lili. Ms. Lili is a Pardee Fellow at the RAND Corporation, Los Angeles, California. She conducts researches and leads projects on cyber threat actors, information warfare, election security, and machine learning. She previously worked in Brookings Institution, focusing on US security strategy and NATO's policy towards emerging powers. So Biljana, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Ihsan. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our panel today. I would also like to thank the CyCon Program Committee for inviting me to speak here. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm presenting a paper that you can also find in the conference proceedings, because I know we all want to get to the beach party. And for time considerations, I'm going to keep my remarks short and just outline the main arguments of our paper. So feel free to read it if you would like to obtain further information about the points I'll address here. Before I start, I would also like to acknowledge the invaluable work of my co-authors. These are Quentin Hutchison, Lillian Ablon, and Adam Moore. Unfortunately, Lily and Quentin couldn't join us here today, but Adam is here, and he's on the front row, so please feel free to reach out to either Adam or myself after this panel if you still have any questions about our work, or if you have any feedback for us. We would like to hear from you and talk to you afterwards. The paper that I'll be presenting is also part of a larger report that we're working on at the RAND Corporation, and we plan to publish a more detailed report on the same topic in the next few months. So if you would like to see how our research will evolve, either get in touch with us or check out our website. So today I will be talking to you about an indications and warning framework, also known as an IonW framework, that we designed in order to predict the early detection, to detect early cyber incidents. So we embarked upon this research because we identified a general discontent among government agencies and the private sector over our current nature of responses to cyber incidents. Today, our responses are rather reactive. If we look at the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, which I have outlined on this slide, we usually are able to focus on detecting cyber incidents at the delivery stage of a weaponized payload, but not really beforehand. The delivery stage and afterwards is usually what our approaches today are. And just to demonstrate that with a few recent examples of cyber incidents that we probably all are familiar with, the 2014 cyber attack on Sony Pictures, the 2015 and 2016 cyber intrusions in the Democratic National Committee, as well as even the 2007 DDoS attacks on Estonia, were all examples of attacks which were detected either at the delivery stage or past that delivery stage. So we propose to address this issue by introducing an IonW framework for cyberspace, with which we hope defenders will be able to make their approaches to cyber incidents a little more proactive and will be able to detect cyber incidents at the earlier stages of Lockheed Martin's cyber kill chain, which in our case will be reconnaissance and weaponization, the first two stages before delivery. Our cyber IonW framework is informed by analysis of existing mature IonW frameworks that the US intelligence community has been using. We specifically chose frameworks that the US intelligence community has been using because that community has been developing them for over several decades, ever since the Second World War. There's enough publicly available literature on them, and also enough information on the methodological pitfalls that one should consider when applying those frameworks. For all those reasons, those frameworks seem very appropriate to base a cyber IonW framework on. So with that in mind, we asked ourselves the first question: what is IonW? How does the US intelligence community understand it and define it and apply it? And how does the cyber community understand it? And as we were conducting our research, we realized that there's a significant terminological divide between the cyber community and the US intelligence community on what IonW is. The US intelligence community has a fairly well-established understanding of this concept. To them, it's a process to detect and report information that forewarns of hostile activities. In other words, it's a structured way of addressing threats and monitoring threats. And the US intelligence community has been using IonW frameworks to monitor the activities of state and non-state actors, usually in non-cyber domains, which are air, space, sea, and land, but not in cyberspace. However, as we all know, the DDoS attacks on Estonia in 2007, which are one of the main reasons why we're here today, placed cyber operations and cyber capabilities among the tools of statecraft and necessitated an adaptation of those traditional IonW frameworks to the cyber domain. That's why, however, despite the fact that cyber has been growing in importance, there's still a lack of understanding of what cyber IonW is to the cyber community. There are various schools of thoughts, and certain cyber experts have different opinions on what type of data should be included in a cyber IonW framework and what the temporal scope of that analysis that should be included in a cyber IonW framework should be. So regarding the type of data, some analysts believe that only technical indicators should be included in a cyber IonW framework. And so far, our defenses are primarily based on technical data. Others have started to adopt the idea that technical and geopolitical indicators should be included in such a framework. Regarding the temporal scope, some analysts believe that only information up to the delivery stage of Lockheed Martin's kill chain should be included in the analysis, while others believe that information past that stage should also be included in this analysis. Because of those diverse opinions, we decided to standardize our understanding of what cyber IonW is, and we created our own definition. You can read about it in our article, but in brief, we think that cyber IonW is an approach that is focused on collecting and analyzing information for the purposes of creating indicators that will facilitate the early detection, prediction, and early warning of cyber incidents relative to one's information environment. So every word in this definition matters to us. We, the four researchers that wrote this paper, spend a lot of time debating each word, but here I wanted to highlight two of the main components of that definition. First, regarding data, we believe that both technical and geopolitical information should be included in a cyber IonW framework. We believe that the geopolitical element is especially important because it can help us identify additional triggers that will help us predict attack in the early stages of Lockheed Martin's kill chain. Second, in terms of timeline, we also believe that information of a cyber intrusion along the whole 7 stages of Lockheed Martin's cyber kill chain should be included in this analysis in order to be able to comprehensively address the adversary playbook. With that definition in mind, we embarked upon crafting the contours of our own cyber IonW framework. And we started by looking at already existing IonW frameworks by the US intelligence community. Here I have listed a few of the frameworks that we examined, and we also described them in more detail in our paper. But a few I wanted to highlight here are the Lockwood analytical method for prediction, which is also known as LAMP. But don't Google LAMP, it's not going to give you the right answer in Google, just write the whole method. The second one is the DoD's Defense Warning Network Handbook. We also looked at some more recently published frameworks that were informed by an analysis of existing intelligence IonW frameworks, but were applied to cyberspace. And one of them is the INSA framework, also known as the Intelligent National Security Alliance framework. What those frameworks are, in essence, are a series of steps that describe an analytical process of data collection, analysis, and reporting. And they vary in the number of steps that they have, and they vary in the emphasis they place on each step. However, we also realize that they contain some commonalities. For example, all of the frameworks recommended that first defenders identify the threats that their organizations face and also identify the assets that they have to defend. Also, the frameworks recommended that each defender should develop attack scenarios based on the malicious actors that they're likely to face and then build indicators based on those scenarios. We also identified certain deficiencies in those frameworks, namely the fact that there wasn't enough information on what data should be included in those frameworks, from where the data should be collected, how it should be analyzed, what methods should be used for its analysis, and how it should be prioritized. Another thing that we thought was lacking was application. There wasn't enough information on how exactly do you apply those methods in practice. So with that in mind, we decided to create our own practical approach to cyber IonW, where we tried to retain the common elements of those frameworks while still trying to correct for some of the deficiencies that we found in them. So our framework consists of 4 steps, and it's threat-based. So in step 1, we advise that defenders define their priority intelligence requirements, also known as PIRs. PIRs is a term used by the military, US military community, and it's well defined in US military doctrine. One of the documents, for example, you can refer to for further information is JP 2-0. PIRs are components of information that are deemed critical for timely and effective decision making. In other words, they're a set of questions that an organization poses to itself in order to understand which are the greatest threats that the organization faces. And in our particular framework, we recommend that defenders start by asking themselves the following question. Which are the groups, the particular groups of intrusion sets that are most likely to pose the greatest risk to my organization and to my systems? Based on that question, we advise that defenders ask 2 sub-questions in order to ensure comprehensiveness of their answer. First of the 2 questions is, which of the identified intrusion sets in question 1 are known to have targeted us in the past? And the second is, which of the identified intrusion sets in question 1 haven't targeted us in the past, but are known to the intelligence community? So based on those answers, we propose that defenders continue to step 2, where they focus their cyber threat intelligence collection, or CTI collection, on collecting technical as well as geopolitical indicators that correlate with the malicious activities of the actors that they identified in step 1. In step 3, we advise that defenders dive deeper into the technical profiling of the threat actors they identified in step 1 and use some threat modeling frameworks similar to MITRE's ATT&CK or MITRE's ATT&CK framework to derive further information about the tools, tactics, techniques, and procedures that the actors they identified actually use. As a final step, we recommend that defenders conduct continuous or constant red and purple team exercises to ensure that their defenses are up to date against the threats that they're most likely to face. So in order to demonstrate how our approach is applied in practice, we proceeded by applying it to an actual case study, which is APT29's, or also known as Cozy Bear's, attack in November of 2018 against US government agencies, think tanks, and businesses. In this particular case, we use APT29's attack against one organization, but for proprietary purposes and to protect the identity of that organization, we named it Organization Z. So before the attack commenced, the defenders of Organization Z already implemented our 4-step threat-based approach. They started by defining the relevant PIRs for their organization, and one of the most important questions that they posed to themselves is, which intrusion sets are known to have targeted us in the past? And one of the answers to those questions was APT29. Based on that answer, Then the defenders of Organization Z proceeded to step 2 and collected technical and geopolitical indicators that correlate with the behavior of APT29. Here, among the technical indicators, they identified tools, tactics, techniques, and procedures that APT29 uses, and specifically their commodity tools preference. Among the geopolitical indicators, they identified a very important one, which was that APT29 was known to have targeted Organization Z in the past during US election cycles. And as November 2018 was another US election month, the defenders of Organization Z expected the attack. In step 3, the defenders of Organization Z used MITRE's attack framework to derive further information about the tools, tactics, techniques, and procedures of APT29. And finally, they also conducted a Purple Team exercise a few days before the attack. And that Purple Team exercise was especially important because the defenders used the threat emulation software Cobalt Strike, and on the basis of the results of that exercise, they managed to improve their verification and detection system as well as their resiliency. They did so by improving a few things in their system. They ensured that their IDS, or intrusion detection system, can detect both the default and the moderately modified Cobalt Strike beacon. And also they ensured that they increased their analysis of DNS traffic. They also made sure that the defenders of Organization Z will receive automatic notifications every time a combination of IOCs that correlate with the behavior of APT29 was detected by their systems. So on the basis of those improvements, then Organization Z was prepared when APT29 attacked the organization, and they managed to contain the attack in less than 1 hour. So this case study demonstrates how a framework can be applied in practice and help defenders improve their defenses. In conclusion, some of the main highlights in our approach is that we recommend that defenders use both technical and geopolitical indicators when they design their defenses. We also think that our approach is flexible and allows for the allocation of limited resources because it helps defenders to focus their resources on the particular threat actors that are most likely to target them. In our future work, we will elaborate on each of those 4 steps and work more on the different methods and predictive analytics that could be applied to improve each of those 4 steps, and we'll also look at more case studies where we can apply our framework. So thank you for your attention, and let's keep bears and similar creatures out of our systems. I look forward to your questions.
Yeah, let's start with the Q&A session. And until then, I'll just keep you in your seat. And any questions? If you have any questions, please. Yeah, I think there's a gentleman over there.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Hong Lee. I work over at National Defense University in Washington, D.C. The question I have is that your indicators and warnings, is it limited to at the organizational level, or have you looked at IonW at a national scale that decision makers at of a country that there are certain IonW that they can see to indicate a large scale attack?
So traditionally, that's a good question. Traditionally, IonW has been applied in that manner, for example, to detect missile launches or military mobilizations of certain countries. In our particular approach, we're trying to focus it to organizations only because we're trying to be specific. And also, one of the main reasons why we started this project was to see how such an approach can be applied in practice. And also, we're going to try to keep our publications and all the information that we release on this matter publicly available and also unclassified. So that would be my answer.
Okay. Any other questions regarding? Okay, maybe I can use this chance to ask my question. I'm really curious about the methodology that you use for the research, actually. So could you maybe address that?
Of course. So we started by conducting a systematic literature review of relevant databases. We looked at IEEE and the Web of Science and JSTOR. We downloaded all articles on the topic that were relevant to our work. We also looked at military doctrine and cyber doctrine of different NATO member states. And finally, we also conducted interviews with US government officials and members of the private sector, primarily in the United States, but also we conducted interviews with experts, cybersecurity experts at companies that work internationally.
Okay. Thank you. And if we don't have any other questions, thank you, Liana. And
Thank you.
it's all yours. Thank you. So our next speaker is Senior Captain Erwin Ori from CCDCOE. He's working as a researcher at the Center's strategy branch currently. Prior to his current task, he was serving at the Belgian Military Cybersecurity Operations Center. So Erwin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hassan. So welcome, everybody. Since I'm from the CCDCOE, it's more like a home game. So I'll try to tell you something about recommendations for enhancing the results of cyber effects or cyber operations, offensive cyber means. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit why we did this research. This is not really part of the research, but it gives an idea why we were investigating this. Offensive cyber is getting more and more attention in NATO and Western countries. It has been for a long time quite ethical, not correct, to think or to use offensive cyber means, but now more and more nations are getting to the point that if it's used in an international law context and it's legally correct, we can use offensive cyber means to keep sovereignty of a country, for example. For example, we have this exercise, Crosswatch, which we always called penetration testing exercise, but since this year we call it training on offensive cyber capabilities. The AGP 320 from NATO, which is the cyberspace doctrine, in the earliest versions had only ideas about defensive cyber aspects. But in the latest version, nations agreed that we could have voluntary contribution of offensive or cyber effects. This is an important trigger, so we can have some phenomena like hackback or using cyber means to respond to kinetic attacks or vice versa. This could increase deterrence or maybe not. I sometimes try to make a comparison with special forces. Some nation gives some effect by special forces, but you don't know where they are, how they proceed, how many there are. You just rely on the effect they're producing. So I had some research questions. First one was how to enhance the decision-making process for cyber effects. Like I've been told plenty of times during the last days, we don't own cyberspace. We own parts of it, small parts, but which parameters do we control and which parameters aren't we? Can we predict the outcome of a cyber effect? Are we sure? What's the level of certainty that this will happen? Can we predict that we can measure the outcome? We do something, is it possible to measure what is done? And last but not least, maybe the most important question we had is what to do to integrate cyber effects as a lateral support from one nation to an organization or from one nation to another nation. So I divided my paper in two parts. Step one is the measuring and predicting these cyber effects. And the step two will be the execution of the effects. First important thing I think we should make is the order of effects. We got a first order, second order, third order of effects. First order is typically something which happens in an organization, in a factory, for a mission, which happened in the IT domain. Afterwards, we can go to second order effects, which is still the same mission, the same organization, but it goes to outside the boundaries of IT. And the third level effects are long-term effects, are maybe changing people's behavior, changing public opinion, having financial impact, international relations. To give you an example of these three levels of these three orders of effects, if you take the NotPetya attacks in 2017, the first order effect would be just hacking the software, which was a tax-paying software in Ukraine. The second order effect would be a company like Marx used this software, got totally breached, and they didn't have any operations anymore. They were not able to know where the ships were, to do any operations. And the third level of effect would be something like nations attributing out other nations. So some nations attributed Russia for the attack. I think the US also did some financial impact measurements. So these are third level of effects. Secondly, we have cognitive and physical effects. Cognitive is more changing people's minds, interfering with elections, influence operations, stealing information. And we got physical effects, like we saw in Stuxnet, for example, where we physically modified some hardware to disrupt the system. Then we got measuring the effects. Measuring the effects are more like questions one should ask themselves. Is it possible to measure afterwards disturbance in the system, or just do something and I don't even know if it has happened? Is it possible to measure the first order effects, or we have to wait for second order effects, or maybe only third order effects? Are there possibly impacts on my own mission if I execute cyber operations or cyber effects? So the next step is estimating the effects. For estimating the effects, one might try something at home. We reproduce the target system and we try to build it and attack it and see what happens. But systems nowadays are systems of systems interconnected, so most probably our test setup will not completely match with the real setup. And mostly we don't even know what the real setup is, because people changing software, patching, updating, so it's very difficult to estimate or to replicate, to copy the target system. We don't have enough test data. Test data is probably highly secure or highly protected. We don't share information about this one, so it's going to be difficult to estimate the outcome. And like I said before, one of the main problems we have, to the very sensitive nature, or at least nation states think, that it's very sensitive, we keep this information for ourselves. We get very good sharing of information nowadays on the defensive side, and criminals and hackers and financial gain, mostly in the dark web, sharing information. But on a nation-state level, we are not there yet to share this kind of more sensitive information. And then one which is very few researched, almost nothing, to how do we estimate collateral damage? What if we do a cyber effect, do a cyber operation, and unintentionally we change data? If it's personal data, it's causing injury or loss of life. What if it's and we penetrate friendly forces, which we don't know they use the same system, the same operating system, or whatever tool? Can we estimate third or second or even third order effects? Can we know of the political outcomes or anything? And if we have a vulnerability, which we make an exploit for, and we don't fix it because we might use it, our own systems might be vulnerable. So if we keep it in our pocket to use it later on, how vulnerable are our own systems if somebody else figure out the same vulnerability? So those questions should be asked, I think, before we start thinking about cyber effects. Then dependencies. You see from bottom to top, we got increasing threats and risks. The size of the circle is the importance of the thing. A military C2 system we own, we can change, modify, harden, do whatever we want. But if we go, we also need military operations, which we are using contractors, critical infrastructure from the host nation. So things we are not controlling so well. But the ultimate goal is to have our mission. And our mission depends on so many things we as military do not control. So energy, medical, financial, transportation. So that's what makes cyber a very different domain of operations, and why it's harder, with its advantages and disadvantages. So if we go and look for the information environment, we might do some information warfare. The information warfare means information operations. Information operations are multiple. And just to give an idea that we have to take into consideration all of those. We have electronic warfare, which we all know for decades. We're using this, so there's nothing special, but it's a part of information war operations. Then we got some very specific, not subcategory, and this is not a limited list. There are much more. We got intelligence, we got psychological operations, which also are part of the information operations. And then only one part is the computer network operations, the real cyber effects. So come to step 2, which are achieving the effects. I use terminology which are very familiar from, hopefully for most military people, is the ends, ways, and means to achieve a goal. First thing is spillover. So we invented a tactical, operational, strategic, and political means to have a good command and control system. We have seen that certainly in cyberways, as well as defense as offense, we see spillover. So strategic actions can have political ends, or from operational to strategic or political, but even quite easily from tactical ways to higher ends. I'm not saying this is not happening in traditional warfare in land, maritime, or air, space, but it's just much easier. Let's say that, for example, the level of decision goes to the strategic to the tactical command, and a tactical cell hacks a mailbox, and the mailbox happens to be an important someone who has impact on political level. A strategic action, which might be very easy to hack, can have very easy political outcomes. So that's something we should take in mind. Then we have a functional view. This is more to explain that cyber effects are not going alone. We have to take this as a whole and have every little aspect studied before we go to the real cyber operations. So we got PsyOps and deception. Typical examples are leaflets and fault targets. Like I said, we have electronic warfare. Typically, we just jam things so that we send huge amounts of electromagnetic energy and the adversary will stop working. We have the traditional signal intelligence, where we can do eavesdropping, and then comes cyber operations. And cyber operations has interference with electronic warfare, like spoofing and telecasts, protocol-based attacks. We can have direction finding antennas to find where the adversary is. And we got cyber network operations. And then we got this mix of a whole electronic warfare, SIGINT, cyber operations, going from web spam, email, personal message delivery, cyber network exploration, and the very typical cyber network attacks. So next thing is tasks in cyberspace. NIST has also something like this, but I made it a more military version of it. We should protect our own systems, and if we're not able to protect it, at least detect that somebody infiltrates in our systems. And if we detect it, we have to defend our systems against the attacker, and in worst case scenario, if the attacker breached our systems, we have to recover. Only if we're very good at this one, we might consider doing the effects. But like I said in the beginning, we might consider hack back, but the opponent does the same. So before we go to the next step, be sure we have defended our systems, which be easy if we have only to defend our military systems. But like I said before, it's a whole realm of different actors in this field. So if your nation state or an ally has some kind of vulnerability, we should also take care of this. So it's easier said than done. And then cyber effects can be physical, like make a system unavailable, disrupt a system. Can be digital, like leaking information, corrupting files, corrupting databases. Can be economic, manipulation, influence operations. Can be psychological. Manipulation, influence is, of course, psychological. Disrupted economic processes are economical, of course. Can be reputational, damage international relationships. And can be societal or social, like the change of public opinion. So it seems that cyber effects might be the best tool for specific goals and might be the worst tool for other ones. And that's what cyber effects make them so special, different than the other domains of operations. So the ways and means. To have good cyber effects, it depends on a lot of things. This is a not limited list, but it depends on education of the society, levels of university to make people that actually can do the cyber effect, makes a GDP on a grand strategy. And we have ways. Ways are not typical cyber, but we can have a long list of them: strategic information or intelligence collection, reduction of logistics. And then we have means. In this case, means are cyber means. We can have insider support, social engineering. A lot of those things are the means we can use in cyber to achieve this. Of course, the defending side will use measures to defend the systems, like hardening the systems, control over the users. Then there are also, ways around, like if you encrypt your systems, we might use quantum computing to bypass encryption. We can have social engineering to bypass certain systems. So it's a whole complex system, and we have to take into account all of those. And then collaborations in cyber operations. I think it's very well known that not every nation has the same capabilities, not for defense and certainly not for offense. So there's a willingness from within NATO, at least, from nations to support other nations or to support a coalition with providing voluntary cyber effects. But we've seen that the operational details of those effects are very difficult to share. For example, if one zero-day vulnerability, and I share it, somebody else can use it, and it probably gets worthless because somebody else, if she uses it, hopefully industry will patch it at some point, or somebody else uses it, I'm not able to use it anymore. So it's very, very difficult to share information. It's also a matter of trust. What do you do? If you don't know which weapons I have, and you don't know how strong they are, how many I have, but you're still sending your troops based on somebody else who's promising something, but you don't know what it is. So coalition partners must be informed of capabilities to understand expected cyber effects, to estimate both probability of success and the expected collateral damage. So, and finally, I have a few recommendations in my paper. There's a whole more, but I wanted to highlight those. We should talk non-IT, non-cyber language. It exists for many years, definitely in NATO, a terminology which everybody understands. Let's keep to the terminology like disrupt, delay. Do not use technical IT terms. It will be very confusing. Cyber can be very fast. You click on a button and the virus spreads, and a millisecond later it's on the other side of the world. But the planning process is much harder if you have to find the vulnerability, the exploit, having the right people who can do so. So you need to plan this in the beginning of the operations and not just add on at the end. Cyber is a very technical weapon. So we need to train people. We have to hire people, maybe install some physical things, having a toolbox. So it needs long-term planning. So the government should have this more than just a 2 or 3 years program. We probably don't have enough resources to do everything. So maybe take a few parts and do them well. But there should be a long-term planning on the political level. So this concludes my briefing. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah. Any questions? See any?
Okay.
Actually, I have a question that gives me a chance to ask my question if no one has. Okay. My question I took note. It's a long one actually, but probably the answer is short. Yeah, like cyber operations and lateral support, considering that in an environment with many-to-many relationships, like considering the allied nations, how do you project that an operational commander or tactical commander can know what kind of cyber effect to request? Like he picks out of a portfolio, or the allied nations can, or like when, in that case, how does he know that this cyber effect can fit in any area or in any target?
I think NATO is struggling with the same problem and also
getting food for thought, actually, like that.
Yeah, it's a food for thought. But I think NATO is heading in at least to define the road. They created CyOC. They created probably some members, which will be permanent or temporarily in NATO, which have technological background and to know what capabilities the nations have, to have a close community to discuss this kind of topic. But I think it's a problem that NATO faces nowadays, and they're working hard to solve this very difficult problem of sharing of information, not telling too much, but still enough to have confidence in each other.
Yeah, kind of, yes, that's what I... Oh, I think we have a question from gentleman.
Yeah, thank you, Brad Bigelow from Shape. First of all, it's not in any of your slides, but it seems like you're presuming that all cyber effects are offensive. And first of all, in terms of application of operational practice, I would argue that the reality is the vast majority of militarily relevant cyber effects are going to be defensive for probably quite a long time to come. So first of all, I think it's important that when we look at planning these as capabilities, that we recognize actually we have most of the toolbox today and we know what that toolbox is, but we need to figure out how we use those to employ from a maximizing operational effects standpoint. I think it's also critical to understand that details of what individual cyber capabilities offensive are going to be very limited in access for a long time to come. I think that's a reality we understand. So some progress has been made to accept that's there, but how it's going to actually be employed is going to be, it's going to take some time to develop. And it doesn't help to exaggerate what the magnitude of the impacts of offensive cyber effects are going to be. You know, if you simply look at what's available in free press, open press, by however mechanism it's gotten out into the wild, you'll find the capabilities. And the best example is the Mueller report, which is rich with RRA information. And what you find is it's the dumbest, cheapest sort of Hacker 101 things that they're taking advantage of, which actually is the good news of that is that those things are still effective, and they're probably going to be militarily effective. So I think this is a great effort, but I think it needs to be taken forward out of theory into operational practice. And how do you see that happening? I mean, you've made a good start here, but where do you see it going with this?
Thank you for your question, sir. I think it's an excellent question. Like I said in the beginning, I'm a researcher for CCDCOE, so we are more like an independent think tank. This paper is not a solution how to do it. It's more like a food for thought paper to open discussions, to have a discussion on things which for the moment may not have been discussed so openly. So I invite you to have a more open discussion so we can find a common way how to proceed and to see to which extent we can have some of these theoretical ideas in practical terms. But I do agree, sir, that it's far from tomorrow that we will have this perfect in place.
Yeah. I think we have room for one more question before we continue with the next speaker. Okay. Thank you so much, Erwin.
Thank you, Sam.
Now, getting into details, our next speaker is my previous senior colleague, Captain Barış Egemen Özkan, currently working as Plans Branch Head at Cyberspace Operations Center at Shape. Previously, he was working at the Turkish Navy Research Center Command at various levels, focusing on development and program management of C4ISR for naval systems. Sir, so stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Can I walk?
Just
this one? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Barış Egemen Özkan. I'm a Turkish Navy captain in Shape, in the SIOC, Cyberspace Operations Center, and my current job is the plans branch head there. It's always a challenge to take the floor after the most attractive topic of the NATO cyberspace operations, which is the offensive cyber, basically, and especially if I'm going to talk about the ugly side of the cyberspace, which is vulnerabilities, risks, challenges, problems, and all other bad stuff. It's going to be a niche topic. Today, I will be talking about the commercial off-the-shelf products, hardware and software, and the challenges that comes with those COTS equipment that we're using. I will try to create a story in a what, so what, and know what sequence. In the what section, I will give some factual information and I give some the problem statement basically. In the so what section, you will hear why this problem relevant to us, why should we care about that, and in the know what section, how we're going to deal with that basically. A couple of recommendations to react on it. All right. So, as you can see on the slides, on the left-hand side of the slides, there are many advantages of using the commercial off-the-shelf equipments, hardware and software in our military systems. Most of them are derived from the cost efficiency. We love them and we use them at the maximum extent. As you can see, in 1994, the United States, the Secretary of the Department of Defense, highly recommended to move away from the military standards and mil specs and rather use the international standards, industry standards in our military systems. And specifically, they recommended to use the commercial off-the-shelf products, hardware and software in the military systems. That coincides with the end of the Cold War, basically. After the Cold War, the focus also shifted from the military investments into the much more on the consumer market investments. The money started changing hands. And that created a very competitive, very fierce market conditions to force the producers to come up with quick solutions for the consumer needs. They need to come up with new products. Look at your iPhones, how often you're changing them, basically. Look at your applications, best applications in your favorite, how often you're changing them. So the one who get into the market early gets the market, basically, and gets like the benefit out of it. And that forced the product life cycle of this consumer market to shrink into 2 to 5 years. And also, like the bill of material, the code software and the hardware that's made up of this, like the consumer products, also shrink to the 2 to 5 years. But when you look at that in the military side, we use the same hardware and software in our military systems. But our military systems have a longer product life cycle, like 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Yesterday we heard B-52s are a very strong part of our deterrence posture, and they are almost 70 years old. And we're still using them, and they're still effective as of the first day. But we need to find a good way, a better way, to come up with the solutions, how we're going to maintain those military systems with like a 30, 40, 50 years of product life cycle when we have only 2 years product life cycle cost equipment in the very center of those systems. And you know what? We are not the only ones in this problem set. Nuclear plants, the transportation system, the avionics, the railway stations, they are all sharing the same problem, just like we do. So at this time, let me tell you a story from my own life. As Isam mentioned, I was, before Shape, I was in Turkey in the Turkish Navy Research Center Command, and we were developing various C4ISR systems there. And in one of those projects, we have developed a new state-of-the-art, cutting-edge technology, command and control systems for one of our frigates. So what we did effectively is like tear down the ship, get rid of the legacy system, and put in completely new system. It looks like a Star Trek ship, basically, for the operators after the old one. And we were so proud after the delivery of this product. After 2 years of the deployment, we got a phone call from the shipyard. Sir, I'm calling from the shipyard. So what's the problem? So keyboard in one of the consoles in these modernized ships is broken, basically. So what can I do? So then change it with another one. Well, we did, but unfortunately, it's all depleted. There is nothing else in the stocks. Then go to the procurement agency and get new ones from the original vendor. Well, sir, we did the same. We went to the original vendor. We asked for the keyboard, and they said they don't have any, basically, because they stopped the production line for this keyboard. What do you mean? So they're not in the keyboard business? No. They're in the keyboard business. They have better keyboards, but it's not fully back compatible. And we just cannot take it and put it in place for the old one. What do you mean it's not back compatible? They have changed the specs, they have changed the science, they have changed the API, some codes are deprecated, some electrical connections are changed, so we are not using the new one, basically. So after 2 years of the deployment of a cutting-edge technology command and control systems, we ended up with something that we cannot use it, basically. We didn't think the obsolescence in our design phase as one of the problem sets. So on that day, I realized that that's a great research topic area. So I started my PhD on this one. So back in time, there was only 2 objectives for me. One is the increased cost, because it cost a lot for us to come up with a new solution, do the old VMB, recertify the system, and redeploy it again. So it was an uncalculated maintenance cost on top of the overall project cost for us. In addition to that, since this console cannot be used, it has decreased the operational efficiency of this ship as well. So those were the only 2 objectives that I started to work. After that, I was assigned to Shape in the Cyberspace Operations Center. Back in time, it was the Cyber Division. Starting as of last year, we became a Cyberspace Operations Center. As part of my business, my job over there, I received the vulnerability assessment reports. So it comes on a periodic manner to me. And I realized that there are a lot of vulnerabilities in our systems. And thanks agency, they're fixing it. They're patching it. They're trying to keep up with the pace of these vulnerabilities. But the numbers are huge. If you look at this slide, over an almost 20-year course of the vulnerabilities, there are tens of thousands of vulnerabilities that have been identified in the softwares. And almost all of them are commercial off-the-shelf software, which probably you all use them in your systems. That needs to be patched, by the way. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. Those are the ones that we know. There is a huge bunch, unknown unknowns, probably like more vulnerabilities that we don't even know, basically. So this is the problem set, the third aspect of the problem set, because all those vulnerabilities, if they're not patched, they will stay in our systems. And you know what? If you have a code in your system, one day or another, it will be obsolete. It's a matter of time for the original vendor to call it obsolete. For Microsoft, for the main operating systems, it's about 10 years. But for the other vendors, it changes from 2 to 5 years, basically. And once it's called obsolete, you are not going to get support anymore for this software. And you are not going to get any patch for this software. And if there is a vulnerability identified in those software, this is not going to be fixed. And you will have to come up with a solution, basically, for this one. And when you look at your configuration management process or the patch management process, probably most of your patch management process are triggered by an event. And this trigger is most of the time that the vendor is pushing down the patch for you. And that's the time that the process starts. If vendor does not push down a patch for you, you just wait idle, basically. And you have to live with that. Only if you're super good and proactively looking at all vulnerabilities and try to mitigate the problem by yourself, basically. So that was the third problem set that I needed to address in the obsolescence management. So we are not the only one in here. Military is just one of them. When you look at this map, energy sector, transport sector, financial sector, the communication sector, all these critical infrastructures are subject to the same threat of the obsolescence, the unpatched vulnerabilities that is either there because of a sloppy design, sloppy implementation, and a sloppy check, unit test, verification, or intentionally seeded in there to be exploited sometime in the future. So this could easily lead into a national security problem if it's not properly addressed. So this is what, and so what? We got a problem, so we got to solve it. So in our proposal, we have a comprehensive approach that proposing to address this problem at 2 layers. At the top layer is the governance layer, basically, that we need to address these problems. I had a chance to look at a quite number of the policy documents, the directives, the strategy documents, thanks to the CCDCOE's database on this one. Every nation, their strategy document is touching the importance of protecting the critical infrastructures. This is good. But when it comes to this unique problem, the COTS equipments and the big impact that they can create, it is almost not mentioned in any of the strategy, doctrine, or policy documents in our hand. So at the governance level, we can at least point out this problem and change our directives, the strategy and policy documents. Obviously, we need a whole of government approach. We need a proactive strategies as well as the reactive strategies. We may need some central consulting agencies to orchestrate the best practices among different sectors and exchange them among each other, which includes the public-private collaboration. We might need some help from the academia to give us a better estimation techniques for the COTS obsolescence in the softwares or COTS softwares. And also we might need to point out the governing the supply chain, basically. Because this supply chain in your systems can be very well easily become part of your kill chain if it's not properly managed at the governance level. That's all I'm going to say on this matter. At the management level, there are very proactive and reactive measures that you can follow. Some of them are listed on the slide, and the details are in the paper for your reading pleasure, that I got it from the US CERT and the GCHQ. So there are many mitigation techniques that you can use. But at the management level, we need to follow a balanced solution, because we are dealing with different community of interest in this manner. At one part, the operational community is trying to get the best benefit out of the system. All they care is to get the job done, no matter what it is, basically. I came from an operational community. This is what I cared for. Get the job done, basically. But on the other hand, the budget holders and the service providers, they are trying to keep it at a manageable level. They're trying to minimize the cost, because the money, the fundings, are not endless. It's not infinite. So they don't care as much as the operational efficiency that the operational community has. They all care much more on the funding side, the budget side. And recently, we are sitting over here, there's a security community of interest, and they are caring much more of the security of this, the systems. So they want to have less vulnerabilities. They want to have a maximum cyberspace security in our systems. And you know what? All these three objectives, maximizing operational efficiency, minimizing the costs, and maximizing the cyberspace security, they are all conflicting each other in terms of the solutions that they're asking for. So in that manner, then we have to find a balanced solution that meets all objectives equally, or that upsets all objectives equally. All right. So in this manner, our proposal is to approach it as a multi-objective decision-making problem with different objectives. At this time, we got only 3 objectives, but it's scalable, basically, to maximize efficiency, maximize security, and minimize the cost, to end up with a set of Pareto optimal solution sets, which is not dominating each other, and let the decision maker to pick one of them depending on his or her preference and priority. So in this slide, you can see just one use case that 2 software have been called obsolete. So we got 3 solutions in the Pareto set. The decision variables are which mitigation technique that we're going to use and what time we're going to apply this mitigation technique. And as you can see in the last 3 columns is the fitness value of the 3 objectives. So they are all non-dominated, the Pareto solutions. It's ready for decision maker to pick one of them. So if I need to wrap it up, I think I'm done, almost done in my timing. You can forget everything what I said, but at least remember those bullets in the last slide over here. We need to recognize the mismatch between the product life cycles of the mother system and the COTS hardware and software that's in the bill of material. And COTS hardware and software is not the problem. We have to learn how to live with that. But not managing the risks associated with the COTS hardware and software, that is a problem that we need to address. And due to the excessive use of the vulnerabilities in those COTS software, it can easily lead into a national security conflict. And the impact could be very high if it's not properly addressed. That's why we are proposing a multi-criteria solution to produce a balanced approach to reflect the different needs of different objective functions. And last but not least, do not let your supply chain to be part of your kill chain. Thank you very much for listening to me. If you have questions, I can help you.
So, do we have any questions? Yeah.
Yes, Ricardo Sevilla, Swiss Armed Forces. I think there are two more aspects in the obsolescence topic here. One is the obsolescence in the hidden obsolescence. Mm-hmm. This means products have life cycles, but part of the product stay the same during this cycling. So if you remember Blue Pill, this vulnerability was present in Windows 7, 8, 8.1, and Windows 10, and the same code in the same kernel was there. So you got a new product with the old vulnerability all along. So this is one part of the problem. And the second is products tends to be driven by, I say, bigger market trends like cloud computing, etc. So the solutions that we often need in the military field are, let's say, a second in a row. So the on-prem solution that you would like to have on your ship is not the one that you are getting as the best one. It's just a second best one.
Yeah.
How can we handle that?
All right. So the first point that you raised is a very valid point. When we look at the software design methodologies, we are moved into an object-oriented designs and the component-based designs, that we tend to use the existing components that we use, and we know that it works fine, and carry on this into newer versions. And guess what? As you just said, once this is called obsolete and vulnerability is a find for the newer version, the patch is developed for this one, but not necessarily for this one. So this is a valid point. For the second question, I think that was the answer of this a balanced solution would be the answer to your question. Because we all tend to look at the problem from our own angle, basically. The operational community, working on board ship, they care I want the ship, the system work, basically. But there are many other aspects that needs to be taken into account. I remember that in one of the test activity that I was being part of it, I was so stubborn to agree with the system because it didn't meet the requirements, basically. We just needed reject it. And one of the 2 stars called me in and said yeah, I understand your concerns, but we need this ship on the way for some other reasons. Okay, so let's just go with that. We can fix it later on. So there might be some a strategic level or some other aspects that we didn't think, that we didn't know, but due to our position, but they're valid concerns for the others that needs to be taken into account. So yes, you're right, but we do not have the overall coverage for the information, basically. Okay, yes, please. I'm gonna stay over here.
Hello, my name is Maxim. I'm a private businessman. I'm coming from the industry background, so I can feel the pain. I thank you very much because you actually highlighted this question that I was wondering about throughout these 3 days, how military is actually trying to keep up with this, with own standards, what you mentioned, that 30, 70 years, thinking forward with this very rapidly changing cyber world. So my point will be that about your balanced approach. So in the past 10 years, we've seen this problem that basically every 1 or 2 years, we have completely changed the vendor, the solution. The complexity of the system grew completely. In 10 years, 10 years ago, we didn't have anything that we have now. And the main point is that the vendors that were trying to go for the balanced approach, they actually achieved some kind of mediocre product that in the end of the day, our clients rejected. So they either went for low cost, quickly, replace, every year there or 2 years, they agreed to completely replace the system. Or the other clients decided we want to pay more, maybe considerably more, but we want 10 years support, 15 years support.
Yeah.
And actually, if you look at the market, for security products, the Bosch, for instance, as a vendor, is still producing the same legacy equipment they used to produce 10, 15 years ago for these sites Subway, for instance, or whatever, these kind of strategic sites. So did you had any kind of validation for your methodology of producing some kind of balanced product? And is it something you've tried, or this is a first step towards some control?
Yeah.
Thank you.
the model that I've been working on had only two objectives as a scope of the PhD, basically. So the last one, the cybersecurity one, is just like a recently added into that. So for the first two objectives, I can answer that I have a model with the use cases. But for the third one, no, we don't have the use case yet. But as a conceptual, like the model, I can add it up, this third objective, and if we can have the data basically, and we can feed into that and see what the Pareto solution set will come up with.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. And I think we need to fast forward a bit, sir. So
I'm good.
thank you for your speech, wonderful speech. Again. And it's time for me to test the fourth seat, actually. Our last speaker is Mr. Daniel Kappelman-Zafra, Senior Threat Intelligence Analyst in FireEye Cyber Physical Team. Mr. Kappelman is coming from a multidisciplinary background covering IT consulting, journalism, and architecture in the energy sector. So Daniel, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, first of all, thank you for everyone for being here. This is the last talk of the day, and I know it's going to be a bit challenging, so I'm going to try to make it very entertaining, or at least as quick and simple as possible. Today, what I want to talk about right now actually follows up on what our peer was presenting a second ago. We want to get more into the specific cases, into what you can actually do, and not just present the challenges, but some ideas into how to solve some of these problems. So this is the longest title you've ever seen, but the big important thing here is information sharing and vulnerabilities in industrial control systems. First of all, to give some background about what we mean with industrial control systems and why we mention critical infrastructure here. Critical infrastructure refers to any industry that is vital for, let's say, the functioning of a specific country. It can go from water, energy, to finance, for example. In this case, we focus only on the cases that actually have to do with industrial control systems, which are those devices beyond computers that basically make it possible to automate processes and to monitor them. So it's basically anything beyond the computer. When you group it, actually, it's called operational technology. And then basically it includes, for example, logical controllers, it includes sensors, actuators, safety controllers, and a bunch of different things that we won't get into right now. So a bit of more background, let's go into the scary thing. So you see where this is coming from. Basically, we have seen, differently from IT, where we are seeing like millions of incidents and it's a credit card and then it's the data stolen and it's whatever. In this case, we've only seen 5 big incidents. And actually one of them, the German steel mill, is actually a myth. It's like it exists, but it doesn't. No one really knows. So the first one was Stuxnet, and that's when industrial control system security was actually created. What happens is basically a worm was created to delay the Iranian nuclear processing, and well, it succeeded. That's what we know about it. I'm going to talk a bit more about that one, but 6 years later, we saw Triton. Actually, FireEye precisely went to one of the energy facility, responded to this incident where a threat actor developed malware specifically to target safety instrumented systems. This is very important because this is not Windows, this is not Linux, this is not software. It goes much beyond that. Like the threat actor actually exploited multiple weaknesses throughout the full chain until they got into the industrial network and eventually developed this specifically for a specific product from Schneider Electric whose protocols are not open, that most people don't actually know even that exist. So what we saw here in common, and the reason why this paper came into like an idea is, at least 4 of these cases, the 4 that are well documented, share something, which is that in all of them there have been known vulnerabilities exploited. For example, in Stuxnet, this was the case. There were some Microsoft vulnerabilities exploited. So the worm was set into Microsoft machines, and then it would expand, let's say, to logical controllers and to search for specific models so that it can start doing whatever it wanted, right? The same thing we saw in the other cases. The 2015 in Ukraine, for example, the power outage. This one is beautiful because it actually exploited, for example, a vulnerability in a machine interface, human-machine interface, which is that beautiful screen that you see with all the tubes and the numbers that the engineer would use. And basically, it exploited this vulnerability. Eventually, the actor had access to those machine interfaces, and there are videos actually that are public where you can see the engineer saying like, "Hey, what's happening? Did we program something? Why is IT playing with this?" And well, basically that was the attack in process. Now, what I want to another thing like before following up is, am I saying then that known vulnerabilities are the main cause for insecurity in critical infrastructure, and that if we solve them, we're going to have safe energy facilities and we're going to save the world? Of course not. I just don't want to create the thought here. Many times this happens. No, specifically vulnerability is a topic that we have as a low-hanging fruit. Is something that we are already sharing information, and that if we don't share it correctly, we're just going to help more the threat actor than actually the person that's protecting. So that is why this is very important. However, there are many other different layers of security that I'm not covering right now, and that are probably much more, or at least equally important. So, in terms of vulnerabilities, what I wanted to highlight is the ICS security community is very young against the IT security community. IT security community, when we're talking about vulnerabilities, we have the CVEs, we have thousands of them. We have methods. We can just go and, let's say, apply this software that's going to search for any vulnerabilities. You add a plugin, and then you solve them, and that's patched, and that's all. It's not that simple, but it's much more simple. In ICS specifically, you can't do that. You can't even go and, you can't go and just scan for the vulnerabilities. You can't just patch them. You privilege availability, so you can't stop the factory for 1 minute because something bad might really happen. So to give a bit more detail into this, there are a couple of things. First of all, what I mentioned, they're difficult to patch. It's not as simple, and you can't have downtime. It can't be simply scanned or queried. You cannot just deploy a software and it's going to make it for you. You actually have to do different cases. You have to have test beds of your industrial network. You have to basically do many different steps for analyzing. Sometimes it's not even necessary. Like most of the devices actually don't even have security embedded in them. So many researchers argue like, why would we even want to patch if they're already vulnerable by themselves, even if we don't find anything? But still, there are others that do require that. We don't have any good mechanisms for risk assessment, because right now they're based on the IT models, and basically difficult to track and identify. So the final piece of background that I'm going to provide is that there are resources for ICS vulnerabilities. Yes, the main one in terms of repositories, we have ICS CERT. So basically, that one is specifically for industrial control systems. However, it actually provides big sheets of information that you actually have to go and read it all through them. And you're considering that an asset owner might actually be going through thousands of assets. So it's actually not practical, and it doesn't have full information. We have ISACs and ISAOs, basically organizations that share some information. ICS vendor advisories, which obviously the vendor is the one that knows the best about their product. And finally, new media. New media, obviously, I'm going to mention why it's so sketchy. We're going to get into this. Now, so after all this background, now we can actually get into the paper. What was the paper about? This paper is just the first part of a multi-phase project, where what we want to do is to design solutions. And to design these solutions, we adopted this user-centered design process. So basically, the first part of the process is go and ask your user, what do they actually want? Not just to say, I am the government, I am the academia, I am private industry or whatever, and I'm going to design for you. But actually, I'm going to go reach out to you and say, what is it actually that you need? And then based on that, I'm going to create this product, right? So the first thing, this research was basically a web survey. That was the first phase. Here it says just number of questions, the sample size we got from multiple industries, but I'm going to get more into that. First thing that's important to highlight here, we had 48 responses. This sounds pretty small for a survey, actually, for any survey that we're used to. However, a couple of good things to highlight. First of all, they were representative of the different industries. Second thing, they were highly experienced in the field. Third, they wanted to participate. And here now they go, these 3 points are what were the challenges? First of all, who in here is an industrial control system security expert? Can you raise your hands? One? I know a second one that didn't raise their hand, but basically we found 2. In the full conference, probably we find 5. Okay? So the community is very small, and that's true because it's really nascent. And right now, most of the attention has gone to IT, with GI, it's the main attack vector. But there's also this new community where you have to combine the engineering skills, the IT skills, and then get people in the middle collaborating. So it's a very small community. The second thing is the clients that share information. Yeah, actually, it's not so easy to get information about this. Sites are normally very cryptic about it. It's quite obvious why. And we actually received some of the very important members from the community to say, I'm against sharing information. As simple as that. So I won't share it. I need it, but I won't share it. Which is important. I mean, that's also something that we need to figure out how to address. Like, to what extent and what information is good to share, what information is not good to share. And finally, lack of active discussion. Yes, there is few to no discussion in the specific field about these type of vulnerabilities, which is very different. But when you go to the vendors, for example, even in ICS, many times they tell you, it's a problem that's solved. We have MITRE, we have the CVEs, we have IT systems. Cool. But basically, when they try to apply it, it's not so simple because it's not basically what is being required at this different level. Comfort with sharing information, this is just a bad pun, but specifically, we found a specific, literally a normal distribution, which was very interesting. So basically, there's no consensus. It's not like more people want to share. It's not more like less people want to share. It's like there's no consensus whatsoever. In terms of habits, we first of all, we made sure that we went to public that use this information, that consume this information often. And second thing that's very important to highlight here is that most of them were motivated by IT security policy. So basically, their organizations or security are probably not aware or simply just do not have these policies specifically for the industrial control systems or OT networks, but actually they were based entirely on what was happening on IT or corporate networks, which is entirely different. Another thing in terms of habits, where's the information that they actually go to check? Well, they go to vulnerability repositories, makes sense, that's the most specialized. They go to private ICS vendors, makes sense, they are the ones that know the most of their products. They go to news and media, makes sense because it's everywhere. However, it doesn't make sense because, for example, just for the funsies, we did some research, and when you figure out known vulnerabilities with fancy names, just as Meltdown or Spectre, for example, lots of people know about them, and everyone checks them immediately, and you have all the information. However, there are other vulnerabilities that are far more critical and never receive attention, just because they never got the fancy name from the media. In terms of challenges, first of all, we found, that 46% were dissatisfied, but only 11% found no barrier. So absolutely everyone said there's something to do. Not really, that's not rocket science. It happens in any policy. There's always something to improve, but at least half of them really wanted a lot of things to improve. And one individual highlighted problems with scalability. I'm going to be quick because I want to keep on time and not keep you here for all the time. In terms of the needs, we found that people is mainly interested in the repositories and alert feeds. Again, it just basically makes sense. However, we highlight these yellow points because that means that the asset owners were also interested in going after regulated forums or community-driven forums. Given the fact that the patches are not so easy as I just pull a patch plugin and it happens, there are many different, let's say, mitigations, alternative mitigations, and different things that asset owners can do. So basically, by having this speech, this communication among the community, you might actually get to better solutions. However, again, this is not so simple. I mean, this is just an initial exploration, and to do that, we would need to look more into different options. So the needs, again, people prioritize the quality of information. So a lot of them believe the information is not up to their standards, which many security organizations have actually pointed out. We have few organizations working on this. The money sometimes is not even there. So how are we going to go about getting more information from more vendors, mainly from like smaller vendors that can't go and invest into this area? They're interested also in usability, accessibility of the platform, basically interested in how to use these platforms and how to consume this information. So I'll streamline to here because this is really where I wanted to get into. The key points that I wanted to get from here is, first of all, insights from ICS stakeholders for the design. Yes, you have to listen to your user. That's the main thing. If we continue doing solutions, piggybacking on IT portions without listening at the different disciplines and trying to connect, probably we're not going to reach the results that we want. The second thing is, this paper offers an initial step. It does some exploration. However, it intends to spark thoughts and to mobilize a community. It intends to get some discussion going on. It doesn't intend to be, like we're solving the world. It intends to say, like, okay, we get some exploration. Look, there is interest and there is no consensus. How can we start going about that? And then the next phases would be more about design. So that's basically the fourth point. The learnings from this research are intended to go into how and what types of platforms can we define and how can we define them so that this happen. This comes more from the informatics and user experience perspective that we try to involve here. Basically, this is very interesting because even when you go to engineering fields, for example, when you see a human-machine interfaces, oftentimes I saw a talk when someone was presenting on, hey guys, I went with some people, asked them how to do it, and then I designed these beautiful interfaces. And people was like, whoa, this is beautiful. Yeah, it's actually useful. If you see some of the interfaces that are designed without taking this into consideration, they're unreadable, unusable, and simply crazy. I would go crazy using something like that. So it's very important to consider, finally, the last point, again, which is thinking about the users, reaching out to the specific user of technology. And this applies not only in ICS, but also in IT. When we go about doing, now in the broad term, when we go about doing policy, when we go about doing recommendations, when we go about finding solutions, we definitely have to listen to the community. And this is like, from my opinion, we can't just go and say, we are going to enforce this, or we're going to create this platform, we're going to solve the world for everyone, unless we actually go and talk to users, talk to the IT people, talk to the engineers, talk to the cybersecurity, talk to the, depending on the topic, right? So that was all. Further research, mainly the idea is what I was mentioning. Let's go and develop this type of research so that we can jump into creating the actual solutions. And well, I mean, yeah, we're interested in information sharing. Right now, we just touched the point of ICS vulnerabilities. However, there are other fields for information sharing that should be considered. Like, for example, about threats, incidents, and impacts. That is not so simple. And in ICS, it's almost right now still cryptic. It's opening, but there's still a lot to discuss. And for those of you searching for research topics, those are beautiful ones. And that's all. Thank you.
So, do we have any questions? Because I got one. Oh, there's a gentleman here. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Marcus from Airbus. Have you? I'm not an ICS expert, but before starting making another product or doing another solution, have you checked the existing ones, like the malware information sharing portal that just jumps into my head?
Yeah.
Would that, with a little adoption to the specialties of the ICS world, do the job you want to do in terms of sharing and just having a tool ready that can cope and help you?
Definitely. Actually, I couldn't get into all of that in depth. It's in the paper. If you go, we did some research into all of the different mechanisms that we have. Right now, I mentioned them in 1 minute because, or 10 seconds because I couldn't. But yeah, definitely part of the idea of this design is not only like creating like a new innovative product that comes up and gets into the new bulk of products that we have. It's actually using some of this information that actually exists in the repositories, but it's thinking about how to improve it. Right now, what there is, for example, is you have a MITRE CVE version, which is great, but it goes more into IT. It contains a lot of information, and definitely it contains as well information for ICS. But right now, if you go as an asset owner, you're going to find there the information about iPhones. You're going to find Android. You're going to find it's just impressive. You really have to develop, to research a lot to figure out what's going on in there. Now, that one, for example, is fed into National Vulnerability Database in US, and I believe other countries have very similar ones that are also open, and you can go into the API and figure out whatever, but still, again, it's not ICS specific. The type of information, actually, for example, when you go to the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, it actually does not reflect for ICS, and probably not for IT, I don't know. Okay.
The MISP doesn't really care about CVE or vulnerabilities. It cares about indicators of compromise. And if you take those indicators as being a firmware version of your Snyder, whatever, that reflects directly to a vulnerability. So all you need is to match a found Snyder version blah blah to a entry in the database. All the Snyders version blah 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 have that vulnerability.
Totally aware. The point is you can't do that so easy because you can't just go and query your Snyders in the facility to begin with. First of all, because
I did that. Sorry.
Yeah, but often you shouldn't just go poking. I mean, I don't know your specific case. I don't know your specific case. I'm sorry.
Just getting the version, the firmware version, Any vulnerability scanner can do that.
Yeah, but the point is, you need different products and different information. First of all, I'm going to go specifically with the CVSS score. When you try to assess risk into ICS vulnerabilities, it's telling me about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Do I care about the confidentiality, integrity? Of course not. That's what I'm meaning more. It's like adapting. Yeah, adapting what there is. Like, for example, you're talking about a scanner. Yes, you can work in a scanner. But for example, right now there are companies that do it differently because you just can't go and pull in Sustainable, for example, which is the most common, and they're actually developing new products so that they can go and set it up, because right now we have multiple protocols there. Multiple of them have never been explored. Right now, this case of Schneider, for example, no one had searched and thought so much about vulnerabilities in SIS before ever. Only after Triton happened, they started researching into that. So it's just, yeah, I see the point. I'm sorry, back in a second ago that they were like, yes, but no. No, I see your point. Yeah, it's definitely building upon what we have. But here, what I'm trying to do is listen to the community so that we can go and adapt these products, but knowing what they need. Because otherwise, I feel it's just, when we try to use the same product, right now everyone is like, well, I can't use it, It's not working, it's failing. But when you get that same product and you do these small adaptations that companies like right now, Tenable Nessus, Nozomi, we're trying, of course, in FireEye, I don't know, like, anyway, all of those ICS-specific companies, that's what they are actually trying to do. Like to go through these products, the scanners, the ICS cert, whatever. For example, ICS cert has received, there are many researchers that have been looking into that. And they go and say, this information is not correct. This one pertains IT. This one doesn't really work. This one, how do we go to improve that? And it requires collaboration, because it's not that ICS cert is doing a bad job. It's just that, it's a gigantically enormous job to do on their own. So, yeah. So basically, we agree. It just, yeah, we have to begin from what we have. But yeah, it's a good question, and thank you.
Thank you.
No question. Okay, then. Thank you, Daniel. So let's continue with our Q&A session. So, I mean, you can take your seat back, actually. Seriously. Thank you. So, yeah, do we have any overarching questions? This is the time. Because I got a couple. So starting with our topic, actually, but actually related to other speakers. I know it's like there's like the comfort level about sharing information about the ICS systems is not diverging for any ICS experts from your slides. That's what I've seen, and usually defending against the attacks, cyber attacks, usually like the government's responsibility. But usually in the nations, those critical infrastructure usually run by private entities, private companies, and I believe that for the comfort level of sharing information between private and public organizations is not that much higher either. So do you think that there's like a easy way, or like not like a total key point, but do you think there's like a way to go for solving this problem?
Okay, just recalling the question, it goes into information sharing between private and public sector, basically.
Yeah.
Correct?
Exactly.
I don't believe there's an easy question, an easy response to that. Basically, we need to remember that both parts have different incentives. Mm-hmm. On the private, the incentive is, they have to make money so that they survive and they can grow. At the same time, most of the companies that I know, and the good ones that we actually know about, have this sense of responsibility, and they do collaborate with governments, with people, and follow different sort of guidelines that are actually set in the industry many times, right? Like, for example, responsible vulnerability disclosure. Yes. It's government, but it's also industry. And, from the type of the government, well, you just care about protection, and you're not going to care that much about the financial incentives. There is a lot of collaboration between private and public sector. I think it is really, really useful. And unfortunately, I can't find an easy solution. But hopefully, we'll continue to grow in that direction. Because
obviously, no one did actually so far. But yeah, I mean, no harm to ask. And for actually, this like our overarching question regarding the enhancing this cyber effects. Do you think that the integration of indication warning methodologies or taking necessary measures with regard to using codes or increased awareness against cyber threats against ICS systems, do you think that this kind of activities will make the task more difficult than it already is, like from the opposite side, like for the enhancing the cyber effects, or like maybe mitigate them when it's their seed level?
Thank
Or,
you.
I mean, it's like you can even bounce the ball, but yeah.
I focused more on cyber effects. But also, one of my slides I said we have to first defend our own systems. And it's already very hard. It's almost impossible nowadays. And with this connecting these ICS systems to the whole grid, it gets even worse. So it's becoming really a system of systems. I don't know where the end is, but sharing of information on all sides, ICS, defensive, offensive, whatever, I think is the only key for success in this one.
So obvious. Do you have any remarks on?
Well, I can only add, as Brett brought it up, currently we are much more focused on the offensive side of the cyber attacks, basically. But there's a quite bunch of defensive cyber attacks also available for us that we need to explore and find a way to integrate them into our operational planning and execution processes. There's a products here though. And the offensive side, at the end of the day, we are trying to find some vulnerabilities and exploit them, and on the red territory, basically. But the same vulnerabilities we probably have in our networks as well. And on the defensive side, we're trying to fix those vulnerabilities, which makes the offensive cyber capabilities very perishable at the shelf. So we just need to find a good balance point for the offensive side and the defensive side developments in the future.
Any remarks on that?
I couldn't agree more with my colleagues. I think information sharing is vital for the successful application of IonW frameworks. And in this respect, it's important to consider both technical and geopolitical information on malicious activities.
Yes.
I mean, I agree, but yeah, it is difficult, and that's the normal curve, the funny ghost in the background. I guess that presents it's perfect. It's like, yeah, we have people on both sides. There's no consensus there. There are improvements, just having these vulnerability repositories, just being here, having these type of forums between all the stakeholders, that already shows a lot of the collaboration. But yeah, there's still a lot of way to go.
Okay. Questions. And another question about that, and I think we're running short of time. Since 4 nations, how long do you think we need for this indication and warning methodologies to get matured enough to apply as our primary framework against the cyber threats, or in due time, do you think we should apply also some traditional risk management methodologies risk impact, risk probability, and the risk exposure, and you should attack with the highest risk exposure and so on?
IonW frameworks provide a high-level understanding of how one can structure the networks. I think every organization should decide for itself which is the most appropriate approach, but we recommend IonW frameworks to be one of the approaches that is considered as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So if we don't have any other question, although we have really enjoyed the conversation here and want to keep it as long as possible, we're running out of time, simply. And besides that, everybody here have this fancy dinner to catch very soon. So on behalf of our audience, CCDCOE, and myself, I'd like to thank our brilliant speakers here for their great work, and I'm extending my deepest appreciation for their contribution to CyCon. So this is the end of our session. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and hope to see you at the dinner.